Hi, this is Gilbert Gottfried, and this is Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast with my co-host Frank Santopadre, and we're once again recording at Nutmeg with our engineer Frank Verderosa. Our guest this week is a producer, actor, songwriter, activist, TV personality, and one of the most prolific and sought-after comedy writers in the history of the entertainment business. As a performer, you've seen him in movies like Mahogany, The Morning After, You Don't Mess with the Zohan.
You don't mess with the title.
and The Aristocrats.
Yes!
I'm familiar with that one. As well as hit TV shows such as The Nanny, The Simpsons, The Martin Short Show, RuPaul's Drag Race, Hollywood Squares, another one I think I've caught, as well as the Broadway production of Hairspray in the role of Edna Turnblad. As a writer, he's contributed to dozens of specials and award shows, including Comic Relief, the Primetime Emmy Awards, the Tony Awards, the People's Choice Awards, and the American Comedy Awards, as well as an impressive 23 Academy Award telecasts. He's also taken home 6 Emmy Awards himself for his writing. But wait, there's more. He's also wrote some of the most iconic, for lack of another word, variety shows and specials of the 1970s, including The Donnie and Marie Show, The Brady Bunch Variety Hour, The Paul Lynde Halloween Special, and last but definitely not least, the Star Wars Holiday Special.
A religious experience.
In a career spanning 5 decades, he's written jokes, songs, and special material for such artists as Cher, Carol Burnett, Billy Crystal, Steve Martin, Nathan Lane, Lily Tomlin, and of course his longtime friend and muse, Bette Midler. He's even had the honor of working with beloved entertainer Gilbert Gottfried. Please welcome to the show an artist of many talents and a man who delights in the fact that he once got Marie Osmond to sing "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me." Our pal Bruce Vilanch.
And the Mormons have never recovered.
Bruce is so sharp, he knows the jokes that are coming in the intro before they come. He's never seen it.
To anyone who will listen.
He's like 6 seconds ahead of the jokes in his intro.
I actually just told somebody that story the other night about how that happened.
Marie,
Marie story.
And
It was the Mormon censors, who are really the worst. They're worse than the network censors.
The elders?
The elders. Yeah. The network censor has nothing to do. She's counting the strobe lights to see if it's going to put epileptics into seizures. The Mormon censors are saying, oh, no, you mentioned coffee. Oh, God, no, you mentioned tea.
They couldn't say caffeine.
You couldn't say caffeine. Everybody had a milk break on the Donnie and Marie Show.
Right.
And so it was, every lyric that came along, they censored. And I kept bringing in songs for Marie to do, and they'd say, "Oh, she can't sing that. That's just too." It was an Ira Gershwin song called "Treat Me Rough," and they said, "Oh no, it's too salacious about getting knocked around by your lovers." And so Ira Gershwin wrote a new lyric for her, and they said, "No, it's still too much." And I couldn't. I said, Ira Gershwin, the Ira Gershwin is, right. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. It's just she can't possibly do it. So then I brought in "Coming from the Rain," which was
I love that.
My friend Melissa Manchester and Carol Sager had just written. And they said, it's about a woman who accepts her husband when he philanders. I don't know where they got that from. I mean, from that lyric.
It's just a lover song.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And they said that she couldn't possibly do it. So out of desperation, I brought in "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me." That they loved. Oh, that Elton John. Oh, he's so peppy and so upbeat. What a sweet message. And so I was sitting in the booth with the network censor, Mrs. Futterman, who looked the way she sounded.
Mrs. Futterman.
Yeah, she weighed in. She was on the heavy side. At the plus size, Melissa McCarthy will do her movie. And the owl's eyeglasses, and we're sitting there, and Maria's singing, "Don't let the sun go down on me," and she's shaky. She's like, "You got away with it, didn't you?" It was
beautiful.
Beautiful. The Mormons were just kind of, oh, this is wonderful.
The irony is you were brought in part to adult her up.
Well, I was actually. Yeah. I was formally brought in when she turned 18 because they wanted to make her more adult. Exactly right. Bob Mackie was brought in to give her dresses.
Wow.
Like, he gave her the, Bob worked with a woman named Elizabeth Courtney, and she built all of his costumes. And one of the tricks to the Bob Mackie costume is it's what's called a Moliere bodice. It's whalebone. It's a corset. And so it's like early version of Spanx. It pushes everything in. And then at the top of the corset are cups for your boobs. And so you take whatever boob you have and you put it in those cups, and you look like you have gigantic boobs. And so he did that for everybody. So people who were really not known for their boobs, suddenly, oh my God, she's bodacious. Look at her. And that was part of, they wanted that for Marie. They wanted her to have that thing. These same Mormons who would not let her sing Ira Gershwin, Treat Me Right.
I wrote her talk show, the morning talk show she did with Donnie, the syndicated show. And I found her to be a bit randy.
Oh, well, now she has 8 kids.
Yeah.
And, we all went to her wedding. We all flew to Utah to the wedding because it happened while she married the basketball player.
I remember.
And we got there and we discovered that we couldn't go inside because we were all Jews.
Oh, God.
Jeez.
Because they kept hiring Jews, because in variety television in those days, the more Jews in the room, the funnier the show. So there was a whole passel of Jews had flown up, and we all were in the courtyard of the Mormon Tabernacle, sitting on lawn furniture, listening to the thing while the Mormons were in the tabernacle.
Incredible.
Yeah. So then she really got Donnie too. Once they were freed of being Mormon kids.
He was a prankster, and she was a little on the handsy side.
Yes, right.
So how did you find out, and when did you find out that Jews weren't allowed in the Mormon tabernacle?
That was the day. Nobody had told us. We flew up for the wedding, and they said, "Oh, you can't come in, by the way. We've organized a lawn party for you." And we sat out there, and Art Fisher was the director of the show, and he was a big Jew, and he was in love with Marie. I mean, first of all, I think he wanted to marry her, and they said, under no circumstances, could you possibly go near this girl? And they married her off to the basketball coach, the basketball player. He was a star, like BYU. And then they had kids, and then she took the unprecedented step of getting divorced.
I remember.
You just don't do. And then years later, she came back to him finally after a bunch of other adventures. But so we figured, okay, we'll kind of respect. I'd always said that we all had to respect each other's religions. I mean, at the very beginning, Mother Osmond, Olive, who looked a bit like Mrs. Futterman, actually. Olive Osmond came into my office, and I was, drinking a Bloody Mary, and it was the 70s, and I was on the phone with my drug dealer looking up. I had the physician's desk reference, so he could mention a drug, and I could look it up right there. And she came in, and she looked, and she said, smoking and drinking, and your body is a temple. Just how can you desecrate your body this way? And I looked at her and I said, "Mixing meat with milk, you heathen. Toy!" And she abruptly left. And I thought, that's it, I'm done here. But no, they figured we need the Jews.
Got to have Jews. Comedy. Can't have comedy without Jews.
The Jews. So we're not getting rid of him. But it was like that. It was at that point, it was like, okay, literally, you go to your church and I go to mine, and I won't mock yours if you won't mock mine, and we would just cheerfully mock each other's.
Wow.
And there's a famous Vilanch story that Donny Osmond, when he was about 5 or something, said to you, "Oh, you look like a big Muppet."
It was the first day on the show.
Yes.
He came into my office to meet me, and he looked at me, and I had a huge beard and a lot of hair. I was very Unabomber in my look, and I was larger than I am now. And behind it, there wasn't a desk that fit. They had to go down to KTLA and get the news anchor desk and bring it up from my desk. So I was a formidable presence, but fluffy, and kind of squishy and cute. And he came in and looked at me and he said, "You look just like a Muppet." And I said, "It's the funniest thing. Jim Henson had his hand up my ass not 10 minutes ago." I think I said fist up my ass not 10 minutes ago. And there was this pause, this long pause. And he started giggling and also doing what turned out to be the moonwalk, backing out of the office while giggling. And I thought, okay, I'm done here. I always thought I was done there. I thought I'd never survive. And then he decided I was okay. I was one of them. I wasn't one of them. I was one of them. I was like an ally because he was always looking for people who would enable him to get out from under the family, because the family was completely suffocating. I mean, these kids had only known the family, and when I say the family, I mean everything: religion, family, business, show business. All was one great big ball of wax that was the Osmond empire. And those kids were a part of it, and there was no escaping. They lived together, and they worked together, and they did everything as a unit. And so anybody who could, spring him from that for an hour to go get his face sanded was the ally.
Mm-hmm.
And Marie was like that, too, except she had to fight her way in because they didn't want her to be – she was supposed to be a good Mormon housewife. And they had 14 kids, one of them a girl. And they didn't want her to do it. They were promoting Jimmy.
I remember Jimmy.
Who was at the time. They said, "Isn't he wonderful?" And I would
Little
say,
Jimmy Osmond.
I said, "Yeah, he looks like they let the air out of Wayne Newton." Yeah. That was then. Then subsequently I got friendly with him. He became a TV producer, and I was in a TV movie that he produced.
No kidding.
Yeah, I played Santa's elf. It's called It Nearly Wasn't Christmas.
How nice you've both played elves.
Charles Durning was Santa Claus, and I was the elf on steroids. I was all little people. All the other elves were little people. We shot the whole thing in, guess where? Utah! Where Jimmy Osmond built a studio in Orem, Utah. And the Jews flew up. A plane load of Jews would fly up every week to do the show.
What was Durning like, as long as you've mentioned?
Durning was
somebody we love to talk about on this show.
He was hysterical, and he was a great raconteur, and he was a wonderful actor and very naturalistic, and was not one of these actors who spent a lot of time on process. If he did, it was privately. He got to the set and he was just kind of ready to go. I mean, and we'd rehearse it, and then right before we would do the take, he'd say, "Is that how you're going to do it in the take? The way you did it in the rehearsal?" And I wasn't sure if it was saying you wanted to make sure or he didn't like what I did in the rehearsal. Because at that point they said, "And action." So we would play this. So this was just his, right.
Was he busting balls?
Oh, no.
He was serious.
There was a girl, a child actress in the thing. She was local, which by local in Utah means they brought her in from Denver because they were cheaper than flying her in from. So, and she was good, but she was like a bratty kid. And we were driving home from the set the first day that she worked, and he said, I met her this morning, and I thought, what a cute little kid. And now I've worked with her all day, and it's Faye Dunaway.
Wow.
So that was, he absolutely brooked no trout.
We love character actors on the show. We love to talk about people like him and Jack Warden and who Gilbert's worked with. You never worked with Durning, Gilbert.
I know. I would have loved.
Oh, he was. He had great. We also had war stories. He had literal war stories.
Oh, I know.
Yes.
I know. But
he fought in the war and he killed people, and he carried this tremendous guilt around.
That's what we heard.
Because he said everybody who I killed was a kid. He said they were like teenage soldiers by the time I got over there, and they were fighting the last stand. And he said it was heartbreaking because I would be close enough to actually shoot them. And I had to. It was him or me. And since it was always a kid, I knew he would shoot me. So I had to shoot him first. But he, I'm doing a very abbreviated,
of course,
version of it. But I mean, with Charles Durning telling you this, it's Charles Durning.
He must have liked you because my understanding was that he did not like talking about that to anyone.
Oh, I realize.
He must have taken you into his confidence.
I heard Charles Durning was among the troops liberating the camp.
Yes,
too.
right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He was.
When did you guys meet? Do you remember meeting for the first time?
Would it have
You've walked
been
together.
Hollywood Squares?
It might have been Hollywood Squares, or it might have
times.
been at the Comedy Store one night. No, I was never performing, but I would have been seeing you. I think that probably it was Hollywood Squares.
Yeah.
I mean, or some other award show, maybe the Comedy Awards, maybe Schlatter.
Oh, that's right. I used to do
the
that
night you
one.
pissed Schlatter off by going on and doing the... You did something
that one they wrote for me, and I did it, and it wasn't funny to begin with.
I see.
Was this where you were stuck on the podium?
No, this was...
Did you do a bit about Pee Wee Herman?
No, it had to do... that was on the Emmys.
Oh.
Where they got pissed off.
Okay.
This had to do with, wearing the red ribbon, the AIDS ribbon. And I thought, in the middle of a comedy show?
Oh, they wanted everybody to wear I remember that.
Yeah. And I remember that didn't do, and I remember that while I was up there thinking, they'll never have me back. and I didn't write that thing. They handed it to me.
I don't think I did either. There were a bunch of us writing on it, but I wrote on a lot of those shows.
Were you present for the famous "You Fool" recurring gag?
I was up there. Absolutely,
you were on the board.
Great.
Up on
the grid.
On the grid.
Yes.
I was, and Penn, right? Were Penn?
I
and
know.
Teller
I
there?
think Whoopi was in. Whoopi was up there.
Started doing. He first did it, and then I just started doing it after each joke, and then I was like the entire show.
It was a guy who kept getting it wrong. The contestant. I mean, every answer.
The woman. They went back and forth.
They went back and forth.
Yeah.
Everyone, and we were bluffing them every time.
Yes.
And they went for it every time.
Yes.
And so it was, you fool.
Yeah.
It was so obvious.
Yeah.
But yes, I was. I don't know that she actually called on me, but in Hollywood Squares, like they call on you if you're strategically where they need to be. I mean, some people they would never call on, and they only will call on them if they have to use it to win or block. So
yeah, and I think with that show, I was the only one left. They had to get through me.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
So it was like I was the entire show.
And they kept missing, and so the next one would have to go to him again.
Yeah.
So it was like 6 jokes in a row or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a legendary one, at least among us, among aficionados of the square.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. Growing up, I would watch Hollywood Squares, and I always liked it, and I always laughed. But I remember growing up thinking, oh, this has got to be the bottom of everyone's career, doing Hollywood. And then when they offered it to me, I had so much fun on that show.
It was great. Well, it was on 14 years the first time, and it was a network show. And I think by the end, it had become, I think a lot of people thought that's what it was. And then it came back in the 80s for 5 years.
Yeah.
And then our version
Well, that was the John Davidson version?
John Davidson and Joan Rivers and Wayland and Madden.
I barely remember that.
And then our version came back, which was like with Whoopi, it was sort of like star loaded, and the idea was that she would attract big names, and to a degree she did. I mean, a lot of people use it as a vehicle to promote stuff. And
did you audition to host the show?
I did.
Yeah.
Yes, I actually did. She suggested I host the show, and they all said, "Oh well, she's nuts," but we can't piss her off this early in the game.
I could see
So
that.
they auditioned me, and and there I was with all these other hosty types. And this one's for the win, Louise. And they said, "Well, we like your energy. We want to put you in a square." And I thought, my friends were producing the show, and so they liked me and they wanted me to be in the square. But I thought that King World that owned the show wanted me because I think they thought I might tame her. I might because they put me next to her so that she and I could chat,
Right.
and have something going on camera and off camera. And of course you can't tame that. I mean, we used to joke that they mistakenly they didn't realize that she is basically a Jewish gay guy and I am basically a black woman. Ask anybody who has slept with me and you will know.
And you worked with someone, Paul Lynde.
Yeah, I worked with Paul.
Now, he was a legendary Jew hater, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. Well, he was Paul. On One Drink was wonderful. And on Two Drinks, he was the Wannsee Conference. He was the Luftwaffe High Command.
Hilarious.
He was, you lousy kike. How you fucked me over, you goddamn cunt. And the goal was to keep him on one drink and not to get the second glass of wine, because it was all, and the Jews were the cause of all of his troubles. And of course, he was surrounded by Jews. His managers were two Jews,
Incredible.
Ray Katz and Sandy Gallen, and everybody significant in his life was Jews. But the other reason he was annoyed was he always felt that he was a big star and had made a lot of money, but he'd come up in New York with other people.
Charlotte Ray.
Well, yeah, but specifically, Woody Allen and Mel Brooks had become movie stars.
Oh, I see what you mean.
And Paul was always like the guy, Rock Hudson's psychiatrist.
Right.
Or the next door neighbor to Doris Day or someone like that. And basically, it started with Bye Bye Birdie, which was his biggest acting role. Where he played the harassed father, the suburban dad, and he never got to where they were, and it just pissed him off. And decided it's because they were Jews. And I kept saying to him, they write their own material, come up with stuff, and they make their movies.
Yes, that's a good point.
They are two filmmakers. And they generate their own stuff, and it's not because they're Jews; it's because they're brilliant and they're funny, and they have this other skill set that you don't have. Aside from the fact that Paul was a great flavor. I mean, he was exhibited best on the squares because he would come in, would do the one line, and get out. And it's hard to carry something when they gave him a sitcom.
Oh, The Temperature's Rising.
Yeah, that was the second one.
Oh,
the
right.
Paul Lynde
Show,
which had a huge first week. And the second week was half the first week because he didn't really carry. It's very hard for the antic character to be the central character in a sitcom because basically you have to have a cool character who is surrounded by colorful people. I mean, think Van Dyke, Mary Tyler Moore. Newhart. I mean, those are the things that work. It's rare that you get Archie Bunker. I mean, that was a magical combination. But Maude was too hot to last, as a soul, the center of the thing. And Paul was just the wrong guy to be the centerpiece of a show.
But great when you'd see him like as Uncle Arthur on Bewitched.
Exactly.
When he could come in, steal a scene.
Yeah. So that never happened. And they bought him out and put him on Donnie and Marie as a regular at the salary he would have gotten had he been doing his own show. So he was making a ton of money. And then we would do specials, but they were special by the nature of it. And we would surround him with funny people. And so he wouldn't have to be on that much. We'd have Betty White and other people around him doing things.
Florence Henderson.
Florence, yeah, exactly. We had that Halloween show with everybody.
I'm glad you got there because we were going to get there eventually.
No, it was fun. And Kiss. And witches. He was a witch.
And he knew who Kiss
Margaret
was?
Hamilton is the Wicked Witch of the West.
I was going to ask you about her.
Witchy Poo.
Billy Hayes.
We had witches. We had Tim Conway. We had Roz Kelly, Pinky Tuscadero.
Yes.
We had we had about 12 guest stars on that show. So he was well protected.
And who came first, Paul Lynde or Alice Gosling?
Well, everybody they came together, although probably not in the same room. They were both, I believe, in New Faces of 52, and Leonard Sillman discovered them both and put them in the show. And what I was too young to have seen it. And the movie, there's a movie of it, but you don't really get the flavor of them too much. You can't figure. I mean, the claim always was one of them imitated the other, and that they became the same person as it went along. But I never was sure who it was. The funniest of all is that, I mean, like, Paul has been dead for 40 years. If he
has he been 40 already?
1981 or 82.
Wow.
If he thought that we would be talking about him, he would be stunned, because in his mind he hadn't made it. He hadn't done anything. He'd made money, but he hadn't become
an icon.
Yeah, that figure. And
now he is.
He would be absolutely amazed.
Watching that Paul Lynde special, first of all, I mean, you're talking about the assortment of drugs.
Well, yeah.
I mean, like you said, Tim Conway, Betty White, Kiss. It's just, it's the perfect 70s TV special.
He's a trucker, right?
He's like a trucker at one point, and he's covered in rhinestones, because I guess
it's a rhinestone trucker.
Yeah, I guess it's a Glenn Campbell. The song was on the charts, and then he and Tim Conway fight over Pinky Tuscadero in a trucker bar. I mean, it's unbelievable.
I've been watching you, Pinky.
Oh, yeah, I've been watching you watching me tour, Paul.
I bet I'm having a better time than you are.
Oh, yeah?
Do you think you could teach me to do that?
I don't know. Give me a little whistle. That's too little. All right, I'll tell you what you do. All you gotta do is follow me everywhere. Shake it up, shake it down, move it in, move it round, disco, baby. Move it in, move it out, move it in and about, disco, baby.
Shake it up, shake it down, move it in, move it round, disco, baby. Move it in, move it out, move it in and about, disco, baby.
Baby, shake it, baby, shake your thing. Shake it, baby, shake it, baby, shake your thing. You got us grooving. We feel like moving. It's such a key thing. The Halloween day.
I like that funky stuff.
And he didn't know who Kiss was? Is that true?
He didn't know who Kiss was. He didn't know who Kiss was. And
Gilbert, you've seen it, yes?
He didn't
know, yes.
He didn't know who Kiss was, but he was profoundly depressed when they brought over the president of their fan club, and that was Ringo's daughter.
Oh, interesting.
Way back then, and he knew who Ringo was, and he was kind of like, he has a daughter. She's old enough to do this. And that made him feel old. But at the time we were shooting the thing, I mean, he didn't know who anybody was really, except like from Golden Age people. But Roots was on, and it was a huge success, gigantic success. And we were standing outside, because I think they had just passed a cigarette law. We were standing outside the soundstage smoking. And Paul was in a cape and a witch's hat, smoking. And LeVar Burton, who played Kunta Kinte, walked by with a little entourage of people because he was going to do, I don't know, Live with Regis or something like that used to be on that lot. And he's walking by, and he sees Paul. And Paul, of course, doesn't remember his name. Just looks at him and goes, Roots! And much to his credit, LeVar Burton just burst out laughing.
What else can you do?
Here's a guy in a wizard outfit. That voice.
What was Margaret Hamilton like?
She was adorable.
Yeah.
She was, at that point, a very old lesbiterian.
Yes. Lesbiterian.
She's lesbiterian, and she had, of course, lived on the down low for many years.
Yeah, I would imagine.
And she was living in Gramercy Park here in New York. And she was pretty frail, and she didn't come out much, but she just couldn't resist the opportunity to do this thing, and with Billy Hayes, who she admired a lot.
Right.
And she thought it would be like her kind of swan song to just do The Wicked Witch of the West one more time. And she was just really funny, and of course, told all the stories, and everybody flocked to her and all that. But I did get a kick out of her because every now and again, there would some gorgeous girl would walk by and she would nudge me on the elbow. Get me her number, would you?
I love it.
But I'm sorry, she's dating Marjorie Main.
Marjorie Main.
Well, Marjorie Main was another lesbian.
Yeah, I'm aware.
And you did that very surreal Star Wars holiday special.
I did.
We had Steve Binder in here,
Steve
too.
Binder.
Yeah.
Well, he was called in.
I know he was the second guy. Yeah.
It was.
He's oddly proud of it, by the way.
Well, we look. First of all, it was the '70s. So we were on everything really, but skateboards. I mean, we could have been if we had any balance left from all the weed we smoked. But I mean, if we thought that 40 years later we'd be talking about it, we would have paid closer attention. I mean, it was in the world of television. It was not unusual to do something insane. Just to get the audience's attention. Wayne Newton at SeaWorld. I mean...
Did you write Wayne Newton at SeaWorld?
I did.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Cole Porter in Paris, starring Connie Stevens. It was just who you want to hear sing Cole Porter in Paris.
God.
A great woman. I'm a friend of hers and I'm a fan. But, I mean, it was just... But that was the kind of show, Steve and Edie sing the Beatles. This was...
Yeah.
And so it wasn't so unusual.
Sure.
Because you would do this thing and it would have a theme and then you would load it up with stars. You were cross-promoting things like it was a CBS show. So it was full of Harvey Korman and originally Cher. But she'd had a little surgery and she couldn't do it. And so Diane Carroll, who fit into the costume.
She's the fantasy.
Was the fantasy sequence. Which, by the way, was the first. She was the fantasy of one of the Wookiees.
Yes.
And he was wearing a VR helmet, which George kind of came up with, and now they exist.
Wow!
A virtual reality helmet, and it would plug in, and your fantasy would be realized. And she was his fantasy realized.
I can't remember if it was Itchy or Lumpy.
It was the grandpa.
Oh, it was grandpa.
Itchy. Lumpy was the kid.
That's right.
And Itchy had the fantasy. So it was the first interracial, interspecies romance on network television. Where is my NAACP Image Award?
Yes.
I ask you.
We
broke ground. It was a double header, not merely racial, but special.
What did you describe the Wookiee language as? The sound of...
Well, I said the Wookiees, they sound like fat people having orgasms.
Right.
Trust me, I know.
That's my favorite.
That was, hi, honey, I'm home.
And the Wookiees, they had a strange description of what they looked like.
I did really.
Well, there was one in particular, I think, that he's alluding to that George Lucas referred to. One of them.
Cuntface was.
Yeah, that's the one.
Cuntface was not a Wookiee. Cuntface was an alien.
Oh, okay.
Okay. George, you don't want to call him by the wrong
I made
name.
the same mistake.
George had done. I have to explain that they're on their way home to the Wookiee planet, Chewbacca, and he's in the Millennium Falcon with Han Solo and Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker, and they stop off on the planet Tatooine, where the cantina. That's the cantina, and all these aliens are there. And George had shot the Empire, but it was editing it, and so he had a whole bunch of new aliens. But he didn't want to use them on the show. And he didn't want to build new aliens. So we used remainder aliens. We went to the alien warehouse and pulled out the aliens that had not made the cut in the first two movies. And they were all like Elmer's glue-all and Scotch tape. And those were the aliens we used. And one of them was like a huge vagina on your shoulders and a kind of nondescript a space captain outfit. And George has there's a vaginal leitmotif in those movies. In the Empire, there's a huge vagina that swallows Jabba the Hutt.
Oh, yes.
And Carrie's holding on, like she's got handcuffs, and she almost goes. It's a big hole in the desert that looks like
the third one,
big
the
old
Jedi.
Big old vajayjay. And the prototype, I think, was this puppet, this head that we called him Cunface, and he made the cut. He was on our show because we just said, we can't, we have to. Even the censor let us use him.
And then it was like he had to be there while B. Arthur.
B was singing a song.
Yeah, she wanted a song, right?
B was Maud at the time, and she had come from Broadway, where she had won the Tony for Mame as Vera Charles, and she had been the original Yenta the Matchmaker in Fiddler, and she wanted to sing. And she brought in a song that she wanted to sing, and it was the dark alien bar, and she decided that she was the kind of Brechtian bartender, the woman who runs the thing, and she was very Statue of Liberty, standing there with her beer stein, and she wanted to sing the Alabama song by Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill. Oh, show me the way to the next whiskey bar. Oh, no, that's why. Oh, and it ends with, I tell you I will die. I tell you I will die. And she said, this is my Brecht Weill number. And I said, it's your Weill Brecht number is what it is. But,
very good.
But we should, and we had to clear it with Bertolt Brecht's estate. And they said, what are you, nuts? You sing for the Otis, so she should sing this thing on television with the alien, with the cunt face. So we had Ken and Mitzi Welch, who had written all of those Carol Burnett medleys.
Sure, they're
legends. And they wrote a piece of special material that was sort of homage to Brecht and Weill. And it was, I forget what the song was, but it was kind of, it also was a lot like Those Were the Days, my friend.
Yeah, I didn't write it down, but.
It was one of those kinds of songs. And so it was a bit more up than the Alabama song. And B sang it. And Cunface was part of the group behind her. And it was 123 degrees, and these guys in the heads were boiling, and they would keep passing out. And every time one passed out and had to be taken away, I would move Cunface closer to B.
Hilarious.
And so finally, it was like a two-shot with her and Cunface at the end of the thing, and she's singing it to him.
Whose idea was it to put Harvey Korman in drag as a Julia Child?
I don't know.
Type?
Well, I remember it may have been mine, or it may have been Rod Warren, who was one of the writers, or Lenny Rips, or Pat Proft. They were all writers on the show, and in a Stone session, who knows?
Right.
But we knew we had to use Harvey because Harvey was on the Burnett Show, which was a big CBS show, and part of it was
working the CBS people in.
Yeah, right. And so we were trying to think of somebody funny Harvey would do, and Harvey, of course, loved to do drag.
He loved to do the big
and the big bosomy, as the stomach churns.
Yes.
And so we thought it'd be funny to have him as Julia. There were a lot of people doing Julia Child. Dan Aykroyd did the very funny one with all the blood, which of course we couldn't do. But we had to do a different one. So we said, let's make Julia Child an alien and have her cooking with 8 arms so she can do a million different things.
You've brought it up to Lucas over the years when you've run into him?
Oh, he walks away.
Walks away.
Whenever I see him, he just head goes down. He doesn't want to be
Don't want
reminded.
to talk about it.
Yeah, for a long time, nobody knew about it, and then the internet happened.
Yeah.
And what happened was a generation of kids who had watched the first 3, which are, of course, now the second 3. They watched the first 3 Star Wars movies on video and knew everything about it and took it as a religion. Discovered through the internet that there was this other thing that they had never known about, that George had actually been involved in, that they then, of course, had to
get it
study, and they were betrayed. They felt, how could he have done this? How could he have lowered himself to this vaudeville with this thing, which is kind of like, the Mishnah.
Yeah, they take it very seriously.
It's the Talmud, these 3 movies. So they began writing him serious hate mail, and so he was appalled because he really thought it was dead and buried.
Nice thing to be a part of, though. A nice part of pop culture history to have been a part of.
Oh, yeah.
From your standpoint.
And then B. Arthur, at the end of her song, she hits her big note and swings her arm.
Yeah, she swung her arm and she knocked Cunface, and he went over. And she turned to the camera and she said, I've never hit a man in the cunt before.
What would you kill to be on that set, Gilbert?
And
of course, God.
The whole thing got cut and we had to reshoot the number.
I just want to. I said one other thing about the Paul Lynde Halloween special. And by the way, I just watched it again. I own it on DVD. It makes me happy. Like the Marty Allen song makes you happy.
Oh, yes.
Every year people say, "Oh, we watch it ritual."
Oh, it's just great. And Billy Barty.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't ask you about.
It is so surreal.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
It is. It is incredibly surreal. Julie Newmar told me a story. Isn't it Julie Newmar?
Sure, we had her on here.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
She told me a story about a Billy Barty story. She said that they worked together on something, and he said to her, "I want to eat your pussy." And she said, "If you do, and I hear about it."
Oh God!
And we've had many. We used to have Billy. We always had something that we would put in for the censor to cut out, and it was always Billy Barty walking over to some tall creature and saying, "I want to go up on you."
Hilarious.
And it was never failed.
You worked on that show that I remember. I watched it recently and thought this must be what hell looks like. And that was the Brady Bunch Hour.
Variety Hour. Oh, actually, we had a lot of fun, but it was like
Sid and Marty.
What was it? That was Sid and Marty.
Yeah,
Sid and Marty Croft.
Because I remember one of them that I watched. They were all in, of course, spandex.
That was
and costumes ugly by 70s standards.
Oh God!
And they did. And now we're going to do a tribute to disco.
Always.
They also did a disco number to end the Paul Lynde special.
That's right.
With Billy Barty.
Right.
And they sing like Staying Alive or something.
It was very popular then.
Yeah.
But, at all the Sid and Marty shows, Earl Brown was a writer of special material who was actually quite brilliant. And he had a Christmas present for everybody, and it was a glass frame, and inside there was a feather and confetti and a balloon, and a little note that said "break in case of finale."
Perfect.
Because every one of their shows ended with balloon drops, confetti.
Yep, the whole thing. Sid was a showman, going back to the Garland stuff.
Well, they did that show in the image of Donnie and Marie. I mean, Donnie and Marie had ice skaters. They had water ballet.
Right, that's right.
And there was a guy named Fred Silverman who ran all three of the major networks at the time at one point or another. And he kind of came up with the idea of weird host couplings. And some of them, of course, were huge. Sonny and Cher, Tony Orlando and Dawn.
Pink Lady and Jeff.
Well, that was one of the disgraces.
Right.
But he had a lot of them really worked. I mean, the very last variety show was Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters, and that was a Silverman idea. And both Donnie and Marie and the Brady Bunch he had originally wanted the Partridge Family. And both the Partridge Family and the Brady Bunch, which were like on in an hour together.
Sure, Friday
nights. They had both gone out on tour and for their audiences, and so he wanted it to be the Partridge Family because it was an extension of the old Partridge Family show about these people who do a show and they live together, and it's a variety show instead of a sitcom. And they didn't want to do it, and so he decided the Brady Bunch should do it. So it was about the Brady family,
which you've described as a meta.
Well, it was totally meta.
Yeah.
The Brady family goes to Hollywood to do a TV variety show. The fact that they couldn't sing or dance, we called it One to Kneel and Seven Captains.
Yeah, I love that.
It's a very 70s reference.
I love that.
But they had done, they did state fairs and things like that, but they were not like, a big Vegas act. They were not cast for that. But so they were on this show. They had to do all of that. Everything, and deal with guest stars. And
yeah, The Simpsons does a wonderful parody of The Simpsons Smile Time Hour.
I remember
Dead on.
In one of their tributes to disco, they have Rip Taylor.
Oh yeah.
Well, Rick Dees first singing Disco Duck.
We had Rick Dees singing Disco Duck.
And then he comes on in a big duck outfit.
And so does Ann B. Davis. She's singing next to him.
And then the same
his love interest.
Rerun comes out in his full rerun outfit.
Yep. Well, he was, it was an ABC show, and What's Happening was on.
He came out with the cast of What's Happening.
And they were all.
This is my childhood, damn it.
One of Tina Turner's first gigs after she left Ike. to make some money on her own that did not involve him was on the Brady Bunch Variety Hour.
Wow. I remember her on that Cher special, too, Tina Turner, the one with Elton John and Tim Conway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where she was solo.
Oh yeah,
Tina Turner.
Later on, yeah. Actually, it was all around the same time. She had a lot of gigs that she had to do where they had bought Ike and Tina, and they weren't interested in Ike solo, but they were interested in her solo, and so we put together an act.
Did Robert Reed enjoy doing drag?
He actually did. He was so repressed. I think he got to work out a whole thing. I put him in his Carmen Miranda. He loved being Carmen Miranda.
What about guest stars on those shows, by the way, before we jump off? Milty, Buddy Hackett, Bob Hope, Vincent Price, anything stand out?
I worked with Vincent Price was hysterical and really loved the kids. And he played it. When I tell people this, they don't believe it, but the model for the show was the old Jack Benny show. Where Jack Benny would just say, "Oh, Mary, I'm going next door to Ronald Coleman's to borrow a cup of sugar." That kind of stuff.
Right.
Which is that sound, the radio gag, this gag with him where he says, we're out of sugar, I'm going down. And he says, I'm going to take a cup and go over and borrow. And you hear footsteps, and then you hear footsteps approaching, and then suddenly the footsteps stop, and you hear a quarter going into the cup.
Great.
It's a great radio joke.
Great.
You know that Jack Benny just put the cup out like a beggar. Anyway, so that was the idea. Was they live in Hollywood and all their friends are stars, and so Vincent Price was the new neighbor at Malibu.
Right, the Bradys.
Right, the Bradys. The Bradys had the Bradys were Malibu, and Vincent Price had bought the house next door. And was coming over to meet the kids and all. It was just, I forget the rest of it, but it was a funny episode. I think it may have been like the Halloween episode.
Sounds right.
But all of those people showed up.
Well, they were on both shows, a lot of them.
On Donnie Marie, yeah, they were. Yeah. Well, Hope, would do every show to kind of promote himself.
Right.
His own specials. But he also, he was on Donnie Marie because he loved the kids. Yeah, and Lucille Ball was on Donnie Marie because she wanted to sing and dance. It was crazy.
So you had to write some things for the guest stars as well.
Always, yeah.
So you had to deal with Lucy and Red Fox and Milty and all of these people.
And what was Bob Hope's? I think it was Bob Hope's nickname to you.
To me, he called me Mansfield.
Because of your long hair.
Yeah, you look like Jane Mansfield with a dick. This is amazing. He was, and I wrote for him separately aside from the show. I
didn't know that.
I had a big kick out of writing for him, but and we got as friendly as you get. He would. You used to just drop. You have to drop the jokes off with the guard at the gate of the house. And I said,
Toluca Lake.
Yeah. I said, no, I'm coming over and I want you to hear you do the jokes. And then he had a box, like a toolbox, or it was a file cabinet, and he'd pull out jokes and they were on cards, and he would deal them like a blackjack dealer. And go, yeah, that's good, that's a beauty, that's good. And you realize this was a world about gas rationing. I realized I was competing with writers who'd been dead for years. These were World War II.
Yes, of course.
That he was going over
because there was because of the energy crisis. It's in vogue again.
But he was very funny and he was very randy, and but I do have to say, I called him up and asked him to do a PSA about AIDS with Everett Koop, who was the Surgeon General.
Right, sure.
And he did it, no questions asked. He came and he did it. He said, "I'm yours." He said, "This is a horrible thing, and nobody should have to die from this thing." And this is
props for Bob Hope.
I know. I was kind of. I mean, the famous right wing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, Charlton Heston marched with Dr. King. So
well,
you never know.
It's the same thing.
Did you write for George Burns too?
I did write for George Burns. I don't know if I wrote so much. I did write stuff, but I remembered for George. I mean, because he was still doing his act, and he would forget, and I was the archivist, I would say.
Right.
Well, he used to do this joke about, let's do that, yeah. And we put that in, and, we'd meet for breakfast, and then he would take a long nap. But
did he talk about the old acts?
He did.
Yeah.
He yeah, Fink's Mules. He always
Fink's Mules.
Fink's Mules. was an act.
You were sitting in when Ron Delsner was here, but did you hear us talking about Swain's Rats and Cats?
No.
Okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
that was another vaudeville act. What was Fink's Mules?
They were trained mules. They were like they would do things, and generally, I think a gorgeous girl would ride on them, and they would, I don't know, they would do. I'm trying to remember what he told me about them, but they were a lot like there was an act, Lotta and her horse, and Lotta worked with doves. And her finale would be the doves would fly from the back of the house and land on the back of the horse and at her command.
You ever just think about getting in a time machine and going back and seeing those vaudeville acts? Or seeing the Marx Brothers in vaudeville on stage?
When I was with George, one of the things, the Pointer Sisters were the opening act. And one of our big jokes was, we got here and the stage manager came in and said, George, there is a hole in the wall between your dressing room and the Pointer Sisters' dressing room. Should I fill it up with something? And he said, let him look.
Right.
So did you work with Benny?
I didn't work with him. I interviewed him. I was a journalist, and I interviewed him. And I interviewed him a few times for the Chicago Tribune. He was in town. I don't know. He was going up to Waukegan to do something. They were honoring him. And I interviewed him then, and then he had a book, and he called and asked me to interview him again. We had a good time doing it, and at the time they were trying to do, I remember, Hello, Dolly. Merrick thought it'd be funny if they did Hello, Dolly, and he was Dolly and George Burns was Horace. And they were going back and forth, and he said, Benny said, I'd do it, except he won't show up. And I'll be standing there in a dress.
And they tried to do the Sunshine Boys with Benny.
They did
Burns.
try to,
He was too
and
sick.
he had many stories about Burns and how Burns had screwed him over at various public appearances.
Well, they shared that manager, right?
Irving Fine, Tisha's father.
Irving Fine.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
They had many. He said he told a story about a fortune cookie dinner where everybody had to read their fortunes, and Burns had put all these fortunes in, and then he gave Irene Dunn a fortune to read, saying, "I want a dwarf to eat my pussy." Irene Dunn gets up and very fast, "I want a dwarf to eat." He did that, and he did the thing he would always do. He told me was when he would be at a party, and Jack would go to light a cigarette, and George would go, shh, he's going to do the match bit.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, there was no match bit.
That's funny.
He was now with a cigarette and a lighter and a match, and everybody looking at him, and he was, of course, Jack Benny. What was he supposed to do? So he just said, and at some level, I hated him, but I loved him.
I don't think people know this about you too. That you were a journalist and a film critic.
You know, it's
and you were a
they
child
made a movie
model
about
too.
me 20 years ago called Get Bruce.
It's a good documentary.
It's all in there, produced by Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, you were telling me
Who
outside.
never touched me. Forget Me Too. I'm starting. Why not me?
The doc
What
is
was
good.
so wrong?
The doc is good, by the way.
Is Rose McGowan that much prettier than I am? Jesus.
The doc is good, and your mom shines in it.
The mother,
as I was saying outside,
she and Robin Williams are the stars of the thing.
Yeah,
and she was really, really funny, and she's very funny in that particularly.
And you were a child model?
I was a child model. I was a charming chub for Lane Bryant. It was talk about a niche market.
Yeah.
But it didn't go much beyond that.
It's all in the doc.
I was a child actor too, but I'm never a star.
And another rheumatoid who you worked with, Engelbert Humperdinck.
You know, he was great to me. I didn't know that.
I
never heard he was a Jew-hater.
I heard that twice.
Really?
Yeah.
But I remember principally at Engelbert was that he was deaf in one ear, and he couldn't hear the orchestra. And I would say, "Turn around." Seemed to me to be the most obvious thing.
We tried to get him here. It didn't
really?
work
I haven't
out.
Seen him in years and years. I mean, I worked.
Love to have him.
We had fun, and it was. But he was resistant. He wanted new stuff, but he was using stuff he'd come up with, like in, I don't know, English music halls or something like that. And he also kind of resented that he had bought Jane Mansfield's house in Holmby Hills, which is now all gone as part of the Aaron Spelling estate. But one of the things that was in the house was a piano, and he said this is the piano where Cole Porter wrote, "They can't take that away from me." And I said, Cole Porter didn't write that. Ira Gershwin. No, I know it was Cole Porter. And he went back and forth about this, and I said, and Cole Porter probably wrote nothing on this piano because he basically lived in New York. He may have come out here for something and all that. But it's not worth it. If they told you that was the song, they were making it up.
Where did you come up with this? He loves to talk about anti-Semites on the show. He loves to talk about which of our guests are Jewish.
I heard two different sources. One was Stewie Stone.
Oh, well, it must be true.
And he said he was opening for Engelbert Humperdinck.
Open.
And Engelbert Humperdinck said that the Jews killed Christ. And Stewie Stone said, he goes, no, it was the Romans. The Jews might have sold them the nails. But
hell.
Did Red Fox say you were too dirty?
No.
Too
dirty for what?
Give you jokes that were too dirty for him. Did he give them to you for someone else?
He would. Oh yeah, he did. He did give me one that I gave to Beth that we turned into a Sophie Tucker joke.
Okay.
Oh God,
I couldn't read my own card. Forgive me.
Too dirty for Red Fox.
No, it wasn't. Henny Youngman gave me stuff that he had gotten from Red Fox.
Gotcha.
And he said it was too dirty. I couldn't do it. And it was one of them was the one of the first Sophie Tucker jokes we did about. I forget what it was. I remember the punchline. You've been munching grass for the last 10 minutes. It was something about in a semi. I forget what it was. But I wrote clean stuff for Red Fox.
You did.
That was what was funny. Yes, because Red Fox had this filthy act. Really filthy. And then he became a big TV star with Sanford and Son. And so we got all these huge bookings that he'd never had before. And he would go, and people would come with their families because they wanted to see Fred Sanford. And he would come out and say, "You got to wash your ass." That. And it was like people streaming up the aisle. And so we constructed this show where he would come out and do stuff, funny but not dirty. And then he would say, "Now I'm going to bring out the lovely Miss Lola Falama, and she's going to sing for you. And when she leaves, I'm going to come back, but it's not going to be Blue Fox. It's going to be Red Fox. It's going to be Blue Fox. So if you want to stay and hear that, you can just say," after he had done like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And they would, stay and they would see Lola, and Lola would do like a half an hour, and then he would come back out and do the old material. And so everybody with kids would leave. But they felt they'd gotten a show, so they hadn't been shortchanged.
Was he great live?
Oh, he was hysterical.
Yeah. Did you ever see him live, Gil? Red Fox?
No.
Boy, what I wouldn't have given. Is there a George Burns, before we move on from George Burns, is there a George Burns Pia Zadora story?
Yeah, there is. I feel terrible telling it.
You don't have to tell it. You don't have to tell it.
What
I saw you tell it somewhere.
I do it in my act sometimes, but I ran into her now. And
okay. We won't put you on the spot.
What about Jack Palance?
Well, I only knew him from the Oscars.
Yeah.
And he won for City Slickers, and he came up and he did that. He did the one-arm push-ups to show.
Yeah, sure.
But what he did before was what people didn't realize was that Billy was the host, and he introduced Whoopi, and Whoopi came out and presented the award, and Jack won, and he came up, and his first thing he said was, "Billy Crystal, I crap bigger than him." And then he started thanking Billy for putting him in the movie, and then said, they all think I'm an old guy, and he did the push-ups, and of course that became like iconic. And we were in the wings, and Billy said, "Well, we have to go with this. I mean, first of all, he said, I'm a piece of shit, and then he thanked me, and then he did these things, so it's hysterical. So we just kept cutting material that we were going to do, and we kept making jokes about what was going to happen. And it became a thing. We won an Emmy for it, and then the following year, he came back to present. So, and Billy was hosting again. So, we did a thing where he's dragging the Oscar, a pyramid, like, a huge.
Oh, sure, I remember.
He's dragging it. He's wearing a harness and bringing the whole thing on and all that. So, I mean, that's been my only experience with him. But I remember Billy telling me that he's really quite scary.
We've had people tell us
he's
that.
He's actively scary guy.
Yeah.
And Billy tells a very funny story about Jack Palance going up to him on the first day and looking at him and saying, "Don't be nervous." And he was towering. I mean, he was towering.
We've had people in here who said he was intimidating.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I think. And so when you see him in that picture with Joan Crawford, you realize it really is Godzilla versus the smog monster.
What? Can you, just speaking of the Oscars, can you tell, and I know people always ask you which jokes never got on, and it's probably a cliched question at this point, but can you tell the off-color Sharon Stone joke?
Yeah, but it got on, actually.
It did?
It was. Well, there was a theme. It was the Year of the Woman. Gil Cates, the producer of those shows, loved themes, and it was the Year of the Woman. And but it wasn't a big year for women. And the joke we had was, oddly enough, the biggest part this year was Sharon Stone's. And she was not nominated, but she was there, of course, and they went to her, and she kind of. The problem was somebody, and I don't know who to credit, put together a really incredible clip package of women in film, and it was absolutely gorgeous and weepy. I mean, by the end of the thing, the audience was like in tears, and Billy followed that.
I see. So it was the placement.
It was the placement.
That was the problem.
It was the placement that got it, and we all felt mortified. And there was no time to change it. And he was, I think he just said, "I'll just go ahead and see." And he did it. So, but it wasn't, it wasn't an obscene thing. We did have, many, many years ago when Richard Gere was going to present, and it was after the gerbil incident. And we were going to introduce him as Richard Gere was going to present, and his original presenter was Fievel from An American Tale. but Fievel backed out.
Hell of a joke.
And Billy said, well, Richard was sitting in the audience, and there was a camera on him, and so he wondered, why is there a camera on me? Because I'm not nominated, and I'm not. And so Billy said, look at him. He's going to have a heart attack. I can't do it to him. I just can't do it. So we cut it.
I also heard you say, this is funny, too. Maybe this was in the doc. Were you talking about everybody that got a Life Achievement Award died, so Doris Day turned it down every year?
Doris turns it down every single year.
Right.
So you get that, you die. Myrna Loy got it. Dead.
Tell Gilbert the other story that's great is it you and Shaman are trying to do a musical number about JFK?
We were, Billy did those film packages.
The packages.
Yeah. And they were all, it was title songs from the nominated movies.
Gotcha.
And of course, they had no title songs, but we would take another song and do a parody of it. And the hardest was JFK, because nobody wanted to be associated with the movie, because it was Oliver Stone and it was about Kennedy and all that. And so one of the ideas that we had was trouble. You got trouble right here in Dallas, Texas, with a capital J and it rhymes with K. There's an F in between. And it was written from The Music Man by Meredith Willson. And Mrs. Meredith Willson, who was living in a home somewhere in West L.A., she had the rights. And,
of course.
And so we had to call her and sing it. Billy and Mark at the piano had to sing it over the phone to her.
I love that story.
And she said, very funny, boys. No way.
That was that.
Right. And finally, I mean, really, we had a lot of ideas. And one of the other things was we were working on this particular number when Maria Shriver showed up with her camera crew for her NBC show that she was doing. And she was doing a behind the scenes. And we said, Billy took her aside and said, we're doing the JFK section. Maybe you want to sit this out? She said, oh, no. She said, I'm a journalist. I can take it. So she came and recorded all of this stuff. And finally, when nobody would do it, Billy called Sammy Kahn. And he gave us 3 coins in the fountain.
Oh, nice.
3 shots in the plaza.
Right.
FBI or Homer Simpson.
That job is problem solving.
It was, yes. Yeah. It was exactly.
Yeah. I teased Gilbert with this over the phone. Is there a story about Joan Crawford and David Niven?
Yes, there is a story. A story that David Niven Jr. told me. Or maybe it may have been David Niven when I interviewed him.
Seems perfect for this show somehow.
After we'd had some drinks. But the story was, after the book came out, Mommy Dearest, people started telling the Crawford stories that they'd never told. And a lot of them had to do with stuff she did when she was drunk, and which was a lot. And I knew her,
Oh, you did know
as
her.
A drinker. I was a favorite interviewer of hers when I was a journalist, and so I'd done several. She was always drunk in these interviews. And David Niven said that when he came to Hollywood, he was fixed up with her on a studio date, and they went out, and it was a terrible thunderstorm, and he took her home, and it was made fairly clear to him that, when you went on a date with her, you wound up fucking her. So that was what she liked. Or if you starred in a movie with her, and all these guys, it was like part of the drill, as it were. And so he said, I should call the people I'm staying with to tell them that I'm going to be overnight here or late or whatever. And she said, I'll slip into something comfortable. And she had, in the house, had a gorgeous staircase that you probably saw in the movies that went up to the second floor. And in those days, people didn't have phones in every room. There were telephone rooms in some houses. There were like little phone booths off the hall. Or she had a phone on a pedestal, and it was in the crook of this staircase, of the grand staircase. And so he went over to use the phone, and he's calling these people, and he's thinking, and it's like raining on him. And he said, oh, she must have a leak in the roof. I must tell her she has a leak in the roof. And he looks up to see where the leak is, and she is hanging over the banister, peeing on him.
There you go, Gil.
My God.
Whether deliberately or by accident, he never knew. Said because it was a good way to end the evening. He decided.
There's my early Christmas
Crawford
gift for you,
was
Gilbert.
peeing on David Niven? From how many feet above?
I don't know, a high ceiling, 12, 14, maybe 18. I mean, if it was,
you didn't see A.J. Benz's reenactment?
It was a great hall, what they called a great hall.
Great hall. I knew that would make him happy, Bruce.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know my co-host.
It's semi-legendary. So, but I remember it being. I think he told it to me in an interview. But I remember asking. I think his son, who was a producer, David Niven Jr., was a producer. If that was the truth, and he said, "Oh yes," he said that was the Crawford.
She peed on him.
Crawford story.
Lucille Lesueur.
Lucille Lesueur. In this case, Lesueur. But she was. There were many. I mean, I collected for a while stories. About
any more?
Nothing as good as that.
That's pretty good.
Nothing as salacious. I mean, just all kind of crazy. Makes you believe that all the stuff that happened in the book, with chopping down the tree and harnessing the kids and making them clean the bathroom, all that stuff happened during what they call blackout drunk periods. But I mean, during drunk periods, because she would always start by being, fabulous and more. My mother used to play cards with Gertie Moskowitz, who lived down the hall from Crawford in the Imperial House up on the Upper East Side. And she said she left. They were playing cards. They used to play. Actually, they would play at night, and she left at night, late at night, like around midnight, and went to, and there was Crawford was in the hall at midnight vacuuming the hall because it was dirty.
Wow.
And she was like in Academy Awards outfit, to vacuum the hall. And she said she was completely plastered, but she said it was. So it's like you hear enough of those and you think, I don't think the woman was lying a lot, when she wrote the book.
Now, do you know, because it's connected, do you know any Faye Dunaway stories?
Oh, I know a bunch because we had the same agent and all that, but nothing like crazy. I mean, a couple of things like that when she was playing Maria Callas in L.A., I had a limo driver who said, "Yeah, we're having a pool to see how many telephones has she thrown at you." But it was stuff like that. I mean, I don't have anything, that's really
Betty Davis.
And I know. Well, I knew her, but I knew her after, towards the end. Not after. I knew her before the stroke, but she was just kind of colorful. I mean, she said I would joke with her. I was on the Midnight Special. I would do like a politically correct thing.
Bert Sugarman's Midnight Special.
And we did. David Steinberg hosted the first one, and the other David Steinberg was a guest, and I was a guest, and a few other people. And he didn't come back the second week, and I wound up hosting it. And I hosted it for 2 years because people stopped doing live television. They would give you their video. They didn't want to come to the studio and do a performance. So they had to fill that time that they used to have with bands.
Mm-hmm.
So they did it with the politically incorrect model. And David was on it. And we were, how did I start this?
You were Betty Davis.
I was Betty Davis. Oh,
yeah.
Anyway, so I was on that show, and I knew I was friendly with a guy who was dating Betty Davis's secretary. And he said, "You've got to meet Betty Davis. She's hysterical. And she has seen you on the Midnight Special," because we were talking about it, because she's up all night. So we had dinner at Betty Davis's apartment. And
very cool.
And I came and she said, "Mr. Vilanch," with the cigarette. And she said, "I saw your television show. Wretched." I said, "Well, that was an early one. We've done more since." She said, "Well, it had nowhere to go but up." "And your hair. When you come in at the beginning of the day, you go to your hairdresser and you say, 'Fluff me.'" And I said, "Well, that means something else now."
Uh-huh. You explained it to her.
"I don't care. You need fluffing." So it was kind of like that.
Hilarious.
She would. I spent New Year's Eve with her one year, and it was during her period where she had the hats with all the buttons. And I went over and I just said, I said, "Something I've always wanted to say to you, Miss Davis. Happy New Year's Eve." And she was a long pause, and she went,
Nice job.
I think one of the things I liked that Susan Sarandon did Betty Davis on that show was that Betty Davis would do Betty. She would pull out the Betty Davis character when she needed it.
I see.
But you could have a real conversation with her. I mean, and Sarandon did that on that show too. Crawford was always Crawford. She was always in character. I never caught her when she was, being offhand or anything like that.
I was glad to see that show, that somebody was making, in this day and age, is making a show.
Well, Ryan Murphy.
Yeah, right. Robert Aldrich.
Now he's resuscitated Vogue and
yes.
ball culture and all that.
And wasn't Joan Crawford in, stag films?
Well, that was the story that she had done a picture with a donkey in Tijuana.
Yeah.
And there are a million versions of it on the internet that claim that that's it. But
right.
I don't know.
Well,
we never spoke.
Speaking of off-color stories, where do you stand on the Paul Lynde Gold Digger's dressing room story? Because we've heard different versions of it.
I don't know that.
Oh, where he said...
Peter Marshall tells it.
He walks into the dressing room and he goes, the way I...
that.
Heard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, It could be. I tell that story differently because I had a similar thing. Maybe he was repeating it.
Do tell.
Well, we were playing Houston, the Arena Theater, which was brand new, and there was the dressing room was a trailer parked over a septic tank. And this was his act we were doing, and with Roz Kelly and Mimi Hines and a bunch of people. And he was putting his makeup on, and he had one of his young nephews with him. This one was named Zach. They were all named Chad.
One of his nephews.
Yes, Chad and Dash and things like that. And they all looked faintly Hitler Youth, and he was putting his makeup on, and I walked in, and he said, "Harold, this trailer smells like a cunt." I think. Is that the same story?
That's the same story,
Yes.
but now it's very interesting because there are several versions of it.
Yeah, but he actually said now whether it may not have been the first time he said it. He may have said, I came in and here's a chance. Because it really did stink to high heaven.
Peter Marshall says it happened to him in the Gold Diggers dressing room.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah,
I mean, I
using the same
because I remember we talked about the Rockettes dressing room smelling like a sushi bar.
And you wrote quips for him for Hollywood's for the old Hollywood Squares.
Well, we were doing Donnie and Marie, and he would at those days they would do squares at night because that's when people were available rather than ask them to do it on the weekend. And so they would do like 3 shows one night and 2 shows another night. And he was leaving ABC going to NBC to shoot it, and he said, "Come with me to squares. I haven't got shit." And we would go and went through the questions and wrote some jokes, and that way I would do that periodically for him. And that was towards the end of, it was the end of Squares. I mean, it was the late '70s. But so I did write I wrote Donnie and Marie stuff for him, and then I wrote some Squares stuff for him.
I think it's fun to know that he would have gotten a kick out of people talking about him.
Oh,
all these, as you said, 40 years later.
Absolutely, he would have just been completely stunned.
Yeah. Gil, did you meet him?
Never met him.
You never
no.
met Paul Lynde?
No.
You met Vincent Price?
I met Vincent Price twice.
And he also lost a part to Billy Barty,
Yes.
which he likes to dine out on.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else for
I
Bruce?
lost the part to Nell Carter.
Did you?
I did. I seriously did. It was as you might expect.
I love it.
It was a fantasy. We're going a different way. What way is that? Nell Carter. Oh, it was a ghost. It was a strange ectoplasmic spirit and a pilot that never happened. It was.
Okay. As we wrap, Bruce, I got a couple here. We already talked about Wayne Newton at SeaWorld, which I must get my hands on. And Las Vegas, an All-Star 75th anniversary special.
Yeah, I did that.
Did you work with the Rat Pack? Did you work with Dean and Jerry and Sinatra? They were on it.
They were all on it. It was a George Slaughter production, yes. And they were all, was Frank on it?
Well, on the IMDb, maybe it was clips. Tom Jones, Rickles, Shecky,
even
Gallagher.
Yes, they were all there. And Dean was on. Dean and Sammy were on it. I remember that. Yeah, it was great. It was at the convention center, and it was. I mean, it was one of those bogus things. A high concept show.
Right.
To get a whole bunch of guys on the thing, but everybody kind of came in and did their thing and went out. It wasn't. Nobody hung out.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to say that. Yeah, we were in Vegas. It was all that kind of stuff.
Okay, I got one of 3 wild cards for you, and you can pick. You can tell us about being in Ice Pirates.
Ooh, that's another epic up there with Star Wars.
Or you can talk about writing. You said you like to say you've written for every combination of Sonny and Cher.
Well, yes, that's true,
including Sonny's comedy review.
Brilliant,
which I will never forget.
Which was opposite Cher. The Sonny, well, not opposite, but at the same time they each had individual shows, and then they went back to do. To work together because they hadn't had, or he hadn't had success, or there was something. I mean, I forget what the timeline was, but he had his own show, and I used to joke that he was on ABC because it takes a village. Oh no, this is if TV is the global village and he's the global village idiot.
He tried so hard.
He did. It was.
I remember hearing because when the big news story was that Chastity Bono is a lesbian, and
Right.
I remember and Cher went out and said, how shocked.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hearing that she was a big lesbian years before this ever hit the news.
Well, yeah. I mean, she was a tomboy, and she was a very butch girl. But she was at the time a rock and roller. She was not a successful rock and roller.
No.
But she was very much in the Melissa Etheridge vein. She wasn't heavy. She was in the Melissa Etheridge vein of rock singers. It just didn't take. And then she decided to come out and kind of give up the performing career. And she went to work for GLAAD as their communications person and all that. And so I think probably Cher was, I don't know, how can I say? I mean, she's the mother and she probably knew, but
Must have been a weird childhood for her.
yeah. Oh, it was very, it was very, because she was, I mean, here she is with the mother who's a mannequin and
Carried out on stage too as a
yeah,
prop.
they made
yes.
it
Yeah.
a big deal.
That
Yeah.
used to be
Always that.
scary.
Yeah, she was adorable.
She was cute, but
Yeah.
she was never comfortable in that role. And but Cher did a very funny thing after that. Some years later, she did a couple of big gay fundraisers, and she said, "I'm doing this to make amends to my daughter." She said, because when she told me she was a lesbian, I did a very un-Cher thing, and I regret it. It was not a Cher reaction. And it was bizarre because she was talking about Cher in the third person.
third person, right.
But
Cher the
there
character.
really is no third person. I mean, Cher is Cher. She's Cher dressed up, and she's Cher, in mufti, if that's what I want to say. But it's always, the attitude is exactly the same. I mean, and she shoots from the hip, and she calls him as she sees him, and all those cliches. I mean, last week she gave somebody an interview. She went to see the musical about her that's trying out in Chicago.
I saw that.
And she said,
yeah.
some of it's great. Some of it needs work. It could use a few more jokes, but I had a good time watching it. I mean, obviously she's getting money off of this thing, but it was a very Cher thing to do. It was like, hey, I'm telling you what I thought. It's going to get better, because she doesn't want to say it's fabulous, it's great, and then reviews come out that are not terrific. So it will get there, I'm sure, but it's just, I thought it was interesting.
We had one of the Hudson brothers on.
We
Was
had
that
Mark Hudson, who's a lot of fun.
And
Yeah, he is.
He had a story that Cher used to hold auditions for her next boyfriend.
In the house.
Oh, that's good.
While he
I
was in
didn't
the
know that.
house.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, was he one of the...
I guess they had a dalliance, but I think they were more friends than anything.
I guess.
Yeah.
He
He's
was
an
friends
interesting
with
guy.
one of her boys. He is probably still friends with Josh Donnan, who was one of her boyfriends
He's very funny.
before Bagel Boy came in. But Bagel Boy apparently is a character. Rob Camilleri is a character
In the Cher
musical.
musical?
Yeah, I don't know if any of the other boyfriends are characters.
We didn't even get to bet, but Gilbert and I found
that's right.
very entertaining. The whole idea that old red hair is back, that she only wanted one guest, and it was Olivier, and he agreed to do it.
That's right.
Yeah,
He did.
that is interesting.
I know he did, and then he called and said that he had to go do The Boys from Brazil.
One of
He
Gilbert's
said,
favorites.
He said, "I'm an old man. I need the money.
Yeah.
He said, I'm going to go hunt Nazis in South America."
But getting Hoffman as a substitute worked out well.
She had met him through Hoffman. Right. They were shooting Marathon Man, and Dustin brought him to see her. We were playing L.A. at the time at the Arthur Chandler Pavilion, and he came back. We were like doing 6 nights, and he came back for every night. He was totally taken with her, and said he would do it. He said he would any opportunity. In fact, there was. At one point they were going to do a big TV version of the second show from Anthony Newley and Leslie Bricusse, after Stop the World, I Want to Get Off With It. And the second was called The Roar of the Grease Paint, The Smell of the Crowd. And it's a lousy show with a phenomenal score. And they were going to do that. It was Cyril Richard and Anthony Newley, and it was going to be Olivier and Bette. And the Anthony Newley character is like a Cockney. Could be a woman, could be a boy.
Interesting.
And and it just never happened. The material was like a little too rarefied, but he said he would do this, and then he couldn't do it, and so Dustin said, "I'll step in and do it," and then we won the Emmy for that show, so it worked out very well.
I remember it. Yes, I remember it.
It's a really good show.
What else do you have, Gil?
Oh, I don't know.
I've gone through almost every card. I will say this. I want our listeners, and we have many of them, to find Bruce's documentary, Get Bruce, which is great, full of stories.
Yes.
I also enjoyed your book.
Well, that was, I was on Hollywood Squares, and I got a lot of book offers. I didn't have a book at the time, and I couldn't sit down and write one at the time. So I collected a bunch of articles and things I'd written for magazines.
Yeah.
And then watched as it got reviewed, like I deliberately published this thing.
There were fun stories in there.
Yeah, that's so too.
Yeah.
And it was fine. I mean, that's what happens. And now I'm working on a book.
I was just going to ask you, what's up now?
Yeah,
what are you doing?
I've written a musical, which is with all of Petula Clark's music.
Oh, we love Petula Clark.
Crazy.
Oh,
85.
Sign of the Times.
Yep, that's the title.
Oh, my God, I love that.
And we're going to do it in Wilmington at the Delaware Theater Center. We open November 20th for 6 weeks. And we've done a few regional theater productions of
Wonderful.
It, so keep refining it.
Did you love playing Edna and Hairspray?
It was the greatest. It was the most fun ever.
Yeah. How many shows did you do?
778.
Good Lord.
But who's counting? I mean, it was 2 years.
What a work ethic.
It was 2 Yeah, it was. It hit an OCD button.
You're complaining about going up on stage 2 nights a week.
Yes.
This man did 770 shows.
Well, you get into that harness. It's getting into the harness that's the hard part. Once you're in it, it's great fun.
Well,
Bet does a hilarious thing, which I hope she will film.
Like vaudeville
about
performers.
Hello, Dolly. About getting herself up the staircase to do the number. Like at the end of the week, after the 8th time she's doing it, and hauling hand over. And then the light comes on, and boom, it's Dolly. But it's hysterical. But that's what it's like. I mean, you do the same thing over, and you find a way to make it fresh for yourself.
Of course.
But it's physically exhausting because, it's repetitive.
It must have been.
Yeah. But stage actors, that's what they do. I mean.
Did you have, and we talked to Gilbert about this same thing. Did you get the high and then have a hard time coming down sometimes after a show?
Oh, yeah.
Because you just.
Yeah, you come off and you're totally exhilarated.
It's like when I get off stage, I totally understand why some people get into drugs.
Oh yeah, I'm with you. I totally get it because you want to preserve that great feeling when it was a good night, when it's worked well and all that. But it's exhilarating. It's hard to just come down from it, and it's also difficult to be with people who haven't had that experience, and so you wind up seeking out people who That's why actors meet each other after the show.
It makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, because they're all sharing that thing.
Go to Joe Allen's and drink till 4 o'clock so you don't have to go home.
And I always remember watching a talk show where Lauren Bacall was on, and she was doing a Broadway show, and she said she would get the adulation and the cheers and then go back to her hotel and be sitting by herself.
That's common. We know that's common. That was part of what killed Janis Joplin, I think, is that she was the only female rock star who got that kind of reception. And then there was nobody there when she came off after 20,000 people were screaming. There was no one person. She tried to find one person, but it never really worked out. But yeah, it's an amazing thing to suddenly have all of that, and then it boils down to, okay, I'll get a cab now.
And I just got a flashback of one story. You probably wrote this for her.
Yeah.
Melissa Gilbert was on Hollywood Squares.
Yes.
Granddaughter of Harry Crane.
Oh.
Is she?
The legendary comedy writer, Harry Crane.
I have a great Harry Crane story.
So Melissa Gilbert's line was, if I married Gilbert Gottfried, would I be Melissa Gilbert Gottfried?
Yeah.
And you were on this show, and you said you'd be the happiest woman in the world.
I know. Well, I'd spoken to the staff at the Comedy Store. I knew.
Fantastic.
I knew. Harry Crane and I wrote the first People's Choice Awards.
Okay.
Whenever that was. And I was like the young writer, and he was the old pro.
His reputation precedes him.
I can't even remember who hosted it, but I was bitching about something about, this guy wouldn't do this material and it wouldn't work and all that kind of stuff. And he said, hey, when you come across one of those, do what I do. He said, I take the check and I put the check on the passenger seat of the Mercedes. And I drive down Sunset Boulevard. And I come to a light, and I look, and there's a person waiting for a bus. And I look at the person, and I look at the check, and I sing, zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay.
I love that. That's for you, Gil. That's advice you need to follow.
As Sophie Tucker said, I will never forget it.
That is great.
Harry Crane.
What a legend.
Oh, yeah. He was, I mean, then he was writing Stephen Eady, but he was like one of the original of those guys who wrote this kind of stuff, who wrote variety shows.
Right.
When there was a lot of variety shows. Isn't that great? Look at the person.
So you're working on the Petula Clark musical, which is soon to happen.
Yes.
Did I hear another book?
I'm writing another one, but it's
okay.
It's taken. I want it to be like a David Sedaris book.
Okay, great. You're the perfect person to do that.
Essays, fiction, nonfiction. I don't want it to be another like okay. And then I wrote the People's Choice Awards. I wanted to have something more.
Right. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that Arnie Kogan said, "Please thank Bruce for not letting the band play Jay, his son, off stage when he was making his Emmy."
Oh, that's funny. I remember that.
Speech,
yeah,
that you were in the control room
I
saying,
was.
"Let him talk."
No, you can't. This is Jay Kogan.
Yeah, and he appreciates that.
What did he win? Was he a Simpsons? What did
he was winning for Frasier?
Oh, for Frasier. Well,
yeah.
Well,
And we did a Father's Day show with Jay and Arnie,
and
they were a lot of fun. There's so much crossover here. We had Jay and Arnie, and he was Donnie and Marie, and then we had Sid and Marty, and they said say hello to Bruce, and now you're here to give a different perspective on those shows.
One day do a whole chart,
a flow chart of our guests.
I think, yeah.
When you do 200 some odd of these, it's funny how everybody intersects.
Beyond 6 degrees,
you all kind of bleed into each other. And this one's purely for Gilbert.
Okay.
And you don't have to tell it if you don't want to, but is there a Tallulah Bankhead story?
Oh, there are several, but yeah.
This is a gift for Gilbert.
I hardly tell it because, I have to explain who she was.
Our listeners know.
But if I do it on stage. But I was in Summer Stock with her. I was in a production of a play called Murder on the Rocks, sometimes called The House on the Rocks. And it was it was kind of a ridiculous sort of melodrama, and I was playing the butler, and I was very young, and I was like 14, and I had a deep voice and all that. But they were casting on the cheap, and we toured all of these wherever there were nice young men who sold antiques. We played mostly barn theaters on Cape Cod. They were kind of ecstatic, and it's a long story. But we played, as I recall, it was the Tappan Zee Playhouse up the river, and it was a star. There was always a star in whatever the production was. And Helen Hayes lived at Nyack, where the theater was. And Tallulah did not care for Helen Hayes. And we never were sure, when you would talk to Tallulah, you couldn't quite make out what she was saying. You'd say, this is lovely. And you'd say, it's the weather. And I'd say, we thought you might go say, Helen Hayes. So you just say, okay, ixnay on the Ellen Hay. But talking to her was like talking to your dog, and your dog is kind of going,
tilts its head,
kind of gleaning what you're saying, tilting its head. And so we would learn not to tread too heavily. And they kept trying to get her to go up to meet Helen, and finally on the last day she relented. And she went up and she had a bite between shows with Helen. And she came back, and she looked a little green, a little bilious. And the guy who worked for her I said, how was it? And he said, it was the food was terrible, revolting. Tallulah has such gas. And so she got through the first act, and she said, "That's right." And then we go out to the gold. And then the second act, the top of the second act, it was kind of a period thing. She wore hoop skirts. And the top of the second act, the curtain went up, and she was discovered downstage center, sort of squatting over the prompter's box where she belonged, and she was in a pose. And before she could say anything, she let out with the longest, loudest, most vivid fart in the English-speaking stage. Her skirt billowed up. The air turned blue in her vicinity.
He enjoys this.
And the audience began they all heard it. I mean, when we could hear it. I was in the third floor, and I heard it on the PA. Oh, my God, she cut the cheese. We ran downstairs. What's she going to do? And the audience is now, tittering, and they're laughing. And now it becomes, a wave of laughter. And now it's hysterical. Now they're, oh, my God, she cut the cheese. Can you believe it? She farts, man. And she just stands there, just majestically, Spartan in her bravery. And it all dies down, and she's now alone, and she just turns very grandly and says, "That one was for Helen."
Fantastic. You got to write another book.
She was quite she was quite, yeah. The other joke that she said, she would tell me famous stories about her and then stuff that was true and all that. But there was I was reading the paper and on the train between one of these places and the other, and it said 6 out of every one. Wait, what is it? 1 out of every 7 Americans is carrying a weapon, and is carrying a gun. And she looked at this and said, "You know what this means, don't you, darling? One of the Lennon sisters is packing a rod."
That's a fantastic line. She must have been hilarious.
She was very funny, but she was also drunk a lot. But at that point, she wasn't around too much longer after that.
It's funny we talk about this flow chart of names. You are a link to so much classic Hollywood.
It's a lot of,
I mean, how many people knew Tallulah Bankhead and Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and interacted?
Well, somebody said, "How old are you?" And I said, "Well,
you're not that old.
I was very young when I worked with them. They were very old.
Yes.
Or they weren't that very old, but they were at the end of their careers, the end of their lives, old or not. But so it was that kind of confluence.
Not many people have worked with Tallulah Bankhead and Gallagher.
It's true. Although you wouldn't have done badly with Tarp around Tallulah. At a certain point, it could get messy.
Gilbert will not soon get over that Joan Crawford, David Niven story.
Boy,
Bruce.
Wow,
that is a great
I
one.
want to hear it back.
Yeah.
Now I'll hear from David Niven Jr. I didn't mean it. But
let this man go home.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you for coming here.
Thank you.
And doing this.
God, it's true. When I was on Hollywood Squares with you, those were like the jobs that I didn't consider jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, because they were fun. They were just fun, and it was a party.
Yeah.
It was.
Whoopi tells me all the time how much fun you guys had, and
we had a great time.
I'm so envious.
It was a day. You showed up in the morning, and there was breakfast, and then we did 3 shows, and there was a big elaborate Wolfgang Puck catered lunch, and then 2 shows, and lots of wine, and we were out by 4. But it was just fun, and you'd be up there, and really nobody could really act up, because if they did, there were like 8 other people going, "Girl, pull it together." Roseanne pulled some shit on it. I forget. She was having an attitude, and Pamela Anderson, I don't know, had a reduction or an enhancement or something, and she was in pain. And Anna Nicole Smith, I remember, was also kind of out of it.
Props to the joke writers too. You, Dave Boone.
Well, we had
John
we
Max.
had fun.
Good people.
Yeah, they were
all
great.
good
They
people.
were great. And it was fun to write. You know, it was fun to write that stuff. It was fun to write for people. The funniest stuff was people who weren't, I mean, scripted, who weren't funny necessarily, stumbling on something.
Yeah.
But it was fun to write for the people who were funny and to get
like him.
Solid laughs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And no, I just remember that show. Yeah, it was. It never felt like work to me.
Yeah, it was right,
just having a good time there.
Well, I'll be looking for that Petula Clark musical for sure. We love her.
Come on down.
And so does Dara.
Come down to Wilmington. It's just 2 stops on the Acela.
I'm going to come and see it. Don't sleep in the subway.
It's in there.
So this has been Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast. I'm here with my co-host Frank Santopadre and our friend, the hilarious Bruce Vilanch.
Hilarious.
Hey. Thank you.
Stories all day.
And into the night.
Thanks, man.